I want to kind of turn the clock back there for anybody who wasn't around back then. And in particular, like to me, and tell me what you think about this. Back then, the secular scene and the Christian scene were very different. I'm not Christian.
Right.
I have tons of respect for Christians, and I like a lot of Christian music. But the scenes were very, very different. Like they did not really overlap back then, at least in my view. Can you talk
Mhm.
about how that was for you?
Well, when we first started off in '92, I mean, we were playing backyard parties, boys and girls clubs, wherever, bars that we weren't even allowed to get into, that they take us out afterwards. Um, and we were never, hey, we're a Christian band. It was never like that. I think people, I mean, we were obvious with our lyrics about things that we believed in. And it was a learning process for us, new to the faith and just kind of very hardcore militant about it,
Mm-hmm.
in a way, because that's just how the scene was. But I think once people realized, that we were Christians, it wasn't until we actually went out on the road, that people started to, kind of claim, not claim you as their own, but that I didn't even know there was such thing as a Christian scene, if that makes sense. Or I didn't
Yeah.
know that there were Christian bands until, we just went on tour with friends, and then all of a sudden we're playing like Cornerstone Festival, which is all Christian hardcore and punk. And then I was like, wow, there's bands out there that are actually decent. You know what I mean? That actually, these are cool kids, and they're actually Christian, so-called Christians.
Yeah.
So that was
What do you
kind of
mean
that
by
was
so-called Christians?
well, I mean, not all of them. That's it's different. I live by a faith, so how do I say that? Oh, this is Christian music, or to me, Christianity is a faith, and we can sit back and argue how to define Christianity.
Got it. Okay. Just some
And
bands
99,
refer to themselves as
right?
Christian.
But
Got it.
99% of the time, the word Christian puts a bad taste in people's mouth. So,
Yeah.
if I'm a mechanic, I'm not gonna say I'm a Christian mechanic. That doesn't make sense. But we happen to be making music, and all of a sudden, but we, like I said, we never said, hey, we're a Christian band. We were just very open and honest with our lyrics. But then once we did finally meet those bands that were on, like, then we discovered like Tooth and Nail, and all these bands. We became friends with them, and then we started to do shows and do underground tours with them. And so then we started to see that there was a little bit of a scene. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it was a learning process to me too. We were just guys in a band, and then all of a sudden, oh, they're saying you guys are a Christian band. I was like, okay, what does that mean?
Oh, interesting. So you guys were not a part of by the time that I found you, you were sort of associated, like I saw in the video for Southtown, you were, guys wearing like Zayo and NIV shirts and all that stuff. And I was into all those bands. So
Yeah, me too.
you weren't really, in the beginning anyway, you weren't necessarily part of that scene.
Once we started touring on our own, I would say 94, 95, 96, 97, we made a lot of friends in that scene. So we toured a lot, as almost just, hey, how do we help each other out? You take me out, we'll take you out. Let's get a couple vans, let's go. You know what I mean? So we were a part of it in that sense. But when we first started playing shows in our hometown, we were playing shows with Cypress Hill, Green Day, Bad Brains, HR, all this stuff. And so it was like, it wasn't until people started to say, hey, well, are you guys like a Christian band? It's like, well, we're Christians. Like, what does that mean? And it wasn't until like I said, we went on tour with some friends in '94 that were actually on Tooth and Nail. And then we're like, oh, this is a huge, I mean, it wasn't huge, but you know what I mean? There was a scene.
Yeah,
In my mind, because I wasn't raised like Christian. So in my mind, there was DC Talk and Striper. Just,
exactly.
that
Yeah.
was my knowledge. You know what I mean?
Right.
But then I met like MXPX, you know what I mean? And once I met the guys in Zayo, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is sick.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but those guys might be a little different. And then you get to know those guys, and you're like, okay, they do kind of have that Christian youth group kind of background. And so maybe they were calling themselves Christian music. We didn't label ourselves that, if that makes sense. But we were
Yeah.
very open. It wasn't like we were, I think at one point we even made like a sticker that said POD Trust Jesus. You know what I mean? And we're like,
Right.
that's how young we were. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. The reason I ask is because, a few years after that, maybe by the mid to late 2000s, in especially like the metalcore Warped Tour kind of scene, it became such a big thing that at one point I just sort of started to assume that any like new heavier band was probably a Christian band,
How funny. Well, dude,
because there were
yeah.
so many of them.
Well, I mean, That's not like, I mean, I don't sit here and take credit for that, but there was a time when, when we were doing the underground stuff, and then there were those bigger Christian labels. And then that's how I knew about, these DC Talks of the world and all these big contemporary Christian artists. So when those those labels were hitting us up to sign us, it was like, well, this doesn't make sense. That you guys have, like, I don't know, I don't even know the bands you have on, but
Right.
apparently they're pretty popular, but that's not us. We were already affiliated with like Brandon Evil and then for Tooth and Nail, but we didn't really jive a lot with those bands. I think we were just too we were kind of in our own world. Those were all like these in a different area. Let's just say that we were kind of in our own world. So we never really thought, yeah, let's go the Tooth and Label route, Tooth and Nail route. And then so when we got approached by these Christian labels, we were like, nah, we're cool. Like, we're already doing it on our own independently. We could just keep doing it. But when we got approached by Atlantic Records, it was a different story. But Atlantic Records I don't think they ever thought we would sell 1 million records on that first album. They were just like, yeah, whatever, let's give these guys a shot. The moment the fans, that 8 years of loyalty, the underground, those fans started calling Tooth and Nail, and they started paying attention. And then, we got on TV and we got on whatever cool tours, and then we sold 1 million records. Then here comes the label Not, who is impressed by our faith and the loyalty of our fan base. They're like, what other Christian bands are there out there?
Right.
And now if POD can sell 1 million, I bet you we can find another band that can sell 1 million. And so what do? They start asking us, like, who else do you know? And we're like, I don't know, Project 86, like bands that we like, Blindside. We knew of Skillet at the time. We're like, okay, cool. They're all, we've met these guys before. They're all cool.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, because it seemed to me like I grew up in Seattle, and so I knew some of the Tooth and Nail guys and stuff when I was a kid. And it seemed to me like you guys really were the breakthrough band that kind of opened the doors for all that stuff, because the idea of a Christian band, especially like a heavy Christian band, being mainstream was just not really an option. I mean, nobody thought that would ever happen. Stryper was the closest thing, and that was years before that.
Yeah, but it was different. That was seen more like this entertainment kind of gimmick. I mean, no, I'm not disrespecting Stryper, but they had this kind of, at the time, that's what music was. You know what I mean? It had this big kind of production and this crazy look about it, and so they did their thing. But for us, it was just it was more underground. But then once the labels realized that we were marketable and they can sell records, that's all they cared about. They didn't care about like, oh, these guys have a message or these guys have something to say. It was never ever like that.